Sorry, I had some issues there. Welcome, everyone. It is July 8th at 4:01 p.m. Welcome to the H.O.P.E Advisory Board meeting. Are we having slides shown?
We do have slides. I'll go ahead and pull them up. I didn't know if you wanted to have Chelsea introduce herself first before I do the slides.
That part. Okay, thank you. I misunderstood when. Would you like to introduce yourself, Chelsea?
Yes, I'm Chelsea Starner, the Assistant City Manager in Philomath, and I'm here as proxy for Chris Workman.
Thank you very much. Good to see you. And now if we take a look at the slide deck. Welcome to our meeting. We're gonna, next slide, I guess. Sorry, don't mind me. Yes, thank you. Some virtual meeting housekeeping. As a reminder, this meeting's being recorded. Please mute your microphone until it's your turn to share, and attendees can unmute themselves by clicking on the mic or camera at the top right of the screen. For public comment, if you are interested in speaking, please let us know in the chat. If you're on the phone, I don't remember, Julie, sorry.
No, that's okay. We'll pause after I check the chat, and we'll pause and see if there's anybody who's called in and wants to make a public comment too.
Thank you. As a reminder, we have some agreements for our culture and conduct that were created by the first H.O.P.E Advisory Board members. And we like to keep this in here just as a reminder to be respectful and have fun. As an overview for meeting agenda, we welcome virtual meeting housekeeping, the overview. Then we'll have public comment up to 10 minutes because it's a working meeting. We try to limit it to that amount of time. Then we'll do the approval of the meeting minutes from last meeting. And then we'll hear from CHRO staff about updates and on shelter funding gap, universal referral for housing and support system, street outreach and encampment response coordination, and the regional assessment and plan for the statewide shelter program. And then we'll do some updates for the coordinated homeless response. So we have public comments right now. Julie, would you like to take that away?
Sure, I'm looking. I'm seeing in the chat that there's Sean Collins regarding shelter. Sean, if you can limit your public comment to 2 to 3 minutes, just in case there's other folks who want to comment, that would be appreciated. You have the mic, Sean.
Okay, can you hear me now? Great. Well, thanks for letting me speak. I just wanted to kind of speak briefly to conditions outside right now and what's needed in the community. Looking at the point in time count over the last couple of years, we've seen a pretty dramatic jump from 24 to 25, a smaller jump of about 3.5%, 25 to 26. But if you look at the number of people out that were in January without shelter, it is double the amount of shelter beds that it would take double the amount of shelter beds we currently have to actually bring everybody into shelter. I think that mirrors the state of Oregon. There's a very large number of people out that far exceeds the number of shelter beds. And part of the reason I want to point that out is just the need to acknowledge for all of us on the H.O.P.E board and the rest of the community that it is not as simple as saying, well, those people just need to come into shelter when there actually aren't shelter beds available for them to come into. I think that the other thing that I just wanted to point out in light of that is how difficult it is to line up the right kinds of shelter that might allow some of those folks who are out to come in. I think when you know, we're at a point right now where congregate shelter is roughly at capacity. And I think that it is not really viewed as the ideal shelter solution. And it is certainly not ideal for many of the folks who will not come into shelter. We need shelter for families and couples. We need greater capacity to support recovery or medical respite. We need shelter that can support people that are in behavioral or health crisis. And we need a lot of wraparound support services. These things, none of them are easy or cheap to achieve. I think that part of the concern that we have right now generally is that funding is constrained. The kind of innovation that we need to actually really make a difference in the community and get more people inside and on their path to housing can't be done without additional resources and some innovation, some willingness to try some new models and methods to bring people in, to make accommodations that work for people that really might not be able to function in a congregate shelter. And if they were coming into a non-congregate shelter, would still need significant wraparound supports. When you look at the funding that the state of Oregon has been providing, it's not adequate right now to sustain the baseline of services that we've built carefully over the last 10 years. And in the next year, that funding is likely to be reduced. So it's imperative that the broader community, agencies beyond the city and county, begin to find ways to creatively fund some of the needs that we have in this community. Because we have a lot of folks out that do deserve to be in a safe and healthy space. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Julie, am I allowed to ask a question?
You are the chair. If you have a question about the public comment, the floor is yours.
Sounds good. Can you talk to me more or tell me the difference between congregate shelters? Like how different is it from the other types of shelter types there are? I'm still very new to this area of knowledge, and so I would appreciate that.
Well, congregate shelter, we operate 2 different low barrier congregate shelters, and think of a large room with bunk beds or single beds on the floor. You're sharing a space with a lot of other people. At the men's shelter, we've got at men's end, at room at the inn, the women's shelter, we've got 50 beds in each of those. If you have social anxiety or PTSD or any number of things that might make that a really difficult space to be in, that can be a very uncomfortable space. Even if it's not full, it can feel very full. Non-congregate shelter would be more like what we offered when we had 3rd Street Commons and people had their own rooms, or in our micro shelters, which are considered transitional housing, where you've really got your own space with a locked door. I think that there are lots of different ways to offer some non-congregate shelter, you know, setting up privacy barriers, you know, even like cubicle walls to create some more private space for people. But right now, that's not an option that we could easily exercise in our shelters without dramatically curtailing the number of beds that we offer.
Thank you so much. I kind of wondered, and also I'm glad that you spoke more to those differences. It's very helpful.
No problem.
Julie, do we have anyone else interested in speaking?
That is all I saw in the chat, and I don't see anybody who has called in on the phone, so we can go ahead and move on from public comment. And I believe the next part is taking roll and approval of minutes, so I can take over if you are ready for me to do that.
Sounds good.
Okay, before we ask for a motion to approve your minutes, were there any edits to the minutes? I received none via email. Paula, thank you again for taking such detailed notes in April. I'm hearing no edits, so we need a motion to approve your April meeting minutes.
So moved. Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Second. Second.
Jim, did I hear you do a second, Jim? Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and take roll as we approve these, and starting with Jessica Andrade.
Present. And yes, sorry.
Thank you. Bruce.
Approved. Thank you.
I think I heard you say approve, but it kind of cut out.
Yes, approved.
Thank
Reviewed
you.
and approved, yes.
Thank you. And I don't believe Rick is here today unless I missed him. April, did you get a message from Rick at all?
Yes, we learned earlier in last month that I'll be Rick's delegate for this meeting.
I apologize. I forgot to note that on the slide here. Thank you for being here. Jim,
Approved.
Jennifer,
Approved.
thank you. And Mark is not here today. Brigida is his proxy. I'm not hearing you, Brigida, if you're trying to speak.
Approved.
Thank you. I didn't see Ryan. Did I miss him? Ryan, are you here today? Okay, and then Chris can't be here today, so we have Chelsea.
Approved.
And Nancy. Is Nancy present today?
Julie, I just put it in the chat that I heard in advance just earlier today that Nancy's unable to make it.
Okay, thank you for that update. I'm sorry, I can't see it while I'm screen sharing.
Totally fine. Thanks.
Thank you. We have enough to approve your meeting minutes. Thank you for that. Okay, Jessica, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. So as a refresher, the CHRO, or Coordinated Homeless, oh shoot, I remember, Julie.
Okay, Coordinated Homeless Response Office, and I should type it out more often
Response
than
Office. There we go.
using the acronym. Thank you.
Thank you. Needs, these are some of the needs that they have from the H.O.P.E board in 2026. Coordination between operational decision makers who have authority to include other departments to collaborate with CHRO in work groups for system improvements, liaising back to member governments and organizations for awareness, buy-in, and policy change when relevant, and to focus on where we have local and regional control to make change. And our goal for today is recommendations to assist in approaching these topics, feedback or guidance to the CHRO as we continue in this work, and understanding this is a big one of just understanding that shelters will close before next summer if we don't get additional funding. And so now we'll go into our updates from the CHRO, and Rebecca and Julie, can you go ahead, please? Sorry.
Yeah,
Don't mind me, everyone. I appreciate your patience.
You're
Thank
doing great.
you.
This is your first time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Andrade. We really appreciate your support and representation here today to get this moving. Thank you. Julie, I just want to tag team this and move forward, or all right. So as mentioned before, staff will be giving an update. One critical one is about a shelter funding gap, but then we also look forward to providing you some positive updates about the work that our community has achieved and the support that the Coordinated Homeless Response Office has offered in the achieving of those goals. And so that includes a universal referral for housing and support systems, street outreach and encampment response coordination, and ultimately the regional assessment and plan that, yes, that is a success. We submitted it last week and then submitted a final draft that was approved by the Board of Commissioners yesterday. Next slide, please. I want to pass this one off to you, Julie, because you really spearheaded the effort in our community to capture this data. I know you're operating on very limited sleep, but I really do believe that you have a story to tell behind how this data was captured and how critical it is to tell a story.
Well, Sean kicked us off talking about how our shelter need our shelter capacity does not meet our shelter need. And our pit count is always going to be an undercount. We will never be able to count every single person experiencing homelessness on one night or in a 10-day time frame. And so those 570 folks approximately who need shelter, that's an undercount. And our shelter beds at around 300. Even when there is an available shelter bed, it's not going to work for everybody. Like Sean reminded us, it's not going to work for couples. It's not going to work for non-binary folks. It's not going to work for people who can't be in a congregate setting with lots of bunk beds. And our whole community comes together with a ton of volunteer time to try to do our best with this pit count. But we have more folks needing shelter than shelter available. And we listed the different shelter options in our community. And these are folks doing incredible work and making sure that there are beds available, and it's still not enough for how much need we have. You want to take over, Rebecca, or you want me to keep going?
Yeah, I can, and if I miss something, you can touch on this. But one thing that, and we really do want to give credit to Oregon Housing Community Services at the state level to provide a lot of planning tools to local communities to really, one, give information back to the state so that they can plan accordingly as it relates to legislative goals, but also helping us as a community understand our resources so that we could be more strategic with those resources. And so in early last year, we were asked to, or early this year, sorry, we were asked to complete a survey about the funding sources that are supporting shelter in our community. And the data collected during that time was able to provide this information. Again, this is information that was captured at a very specific time of, and we had a very limited time to capture it. So things can change since these numbers were originally documented. But as you can see, the majority of funding that comes to our community is coming from the state and private funding. The remaining gaps of funding are from our partners at IHNCCO, along with some federal funding that comes to our community, which it can be seen through our different agencies who have direct grants through the federal government, or they are going through our continued care for that funding. We also have other state funding that's usually seen in Oregon Health Authority grants, and then potentially maybe some other more smaller micro grants that the state offers. And then we also have the city funding, and this is a real shout out to the creativity on our city partners to be able to prioritize some of the social services funding to be directly prioritized towards shelters. So just showing how we as different agencies are able to support the overarching system and really seeing where large sums of money are coming from to our community. And so this is a visual representation of that. We really think that this is an important thing to consider. As we know, as we just mentioned in the previous slide, the blue section represents the funding that we get from the state. This is largely investments that came in through the executive orders declaring an emergency on homelessness and some remaining policies and prioritizations from the COVID era that allowed this large level of investment from the state level. We now know that is not a static, graphic, and from a state perspective, and also any of these other colors that you see in this pie graph those are not static or predictable as well at this time. So we just wanted to make sure that we presented this to this body because we know you each represent different agencies and are in different forums where this particular information could be beneficial for building awareness on this really critical visual that represents what we are doing in our community. Next slide. So as we said, there's some uncertainty about the future funding landscape for our shelter. We were very excited to be announced as the regional coordinator for the new statewide shelter program. And we understand, obviously, to be successful in a lot of these things, there's always that dollar consideration. However, we are also realizing that, there's other purposes for that plan. However, that are outside of just strictly strategic use of funding. It's also how are we having actual human outcomes. However, as we are looking at the actual funding availability, it was challenging to approach the development of that plan and really set ourselves accountable to goals for our community because of us facing what is the equivalent of approximately $500,000 reduction in available funding. That is just from what we got from the state through the statewide shelter program. And that does not account for other resources we used the prior fiscal year to fill gaps from our phase 1 statewide shelter program allocation. As you can see, this makes it challenging to prioritize resources in a way that actually meets the human needs in our community. I do think, Julie, based on feedback that we got when we sat down with Councillor Moorfield and Councillor Andrade, is this phase 1 versus phase 2. And I don't know if we have a slide that makes that distinction, so I just want to make sure I cover that now if that is not covered, if you can recall.
No, we did not
Okay.
describe phase 1 or phase 2. I also saw that April came unmuted, and I didn't know if she wanted to chime in on something on this slide in particular.
I'm sorry, that was an error on my part.
All right, so we just wanted to clarify that the statewide shelter program, the intention is to formalize the investments and the planning that occurred during the executive orders declaring an emergency on homelessness. Phase 1 was intended as a on-ramp to the formalization of the statewide shelter program. And so they preserved some of the existing planning bodies that were in communities that were used to administrate the dollars and achieve the goals in each community. So they did not require new application process for the phase 1. They preserved the existing grantees for those previous dollars. So Benton County, having been the grantee and the administrator of those previous executive order dollars, we automatically became the phase 1 administrator. Phase 2, however, was selected through a competitive process, and that is where Benton County applied to become the regional coordinator to preserve the effort we had already achieved through the executive orders and the work of the H.O.P.E board historically, along with the Coordinated Homeless Response Office through House Bill 4123. And so phase 2 is that allocation that is associated with this now formalization of the statewide shelter program and the formalization of the regional coordinators to be part of that effort. So that's just clarity about what we mean by phase 1 and phase 2. All right. We could go back to the slides. All right. You know, and I what does it mean on a staff level? Sorry, Councillor Moorfield, really actually would like to hand this over to you. I think that you might be able to cover this slide in a context that I cannot.
Well, I
Sorry,
was raising
I
my
forgot.
hand for
Yeah.
a question.
Sorry, I forgot that I can call on you. Councillor Moorfield.
I have a question before we get into the discussion. Can you be more specific about the source of the $500,000 reduction? Because in the last period, it was mostly OHCS, but also you mentioned Oregon Health Authority and other miscellaneous sources. So now we're talking about 500,000. What's the source of that reduction?
So that's an estimate at this point. So what occurred is this is going to get a little technical, so bear with me. We had investments that were occurring during COVID. And that was that was able to sustain a certain level of shelter that included much of the shelter we see today. And then we also had House Bill 5019, which is was the budget ORS for the executive orders declaring an emergency on homelessness. So, and well, we're going back in time. So, and I will. the overview that I'm giving you is very generalized, and I would ask that if in a future meeting you would request as board members, we can provide a better historical account, because I am doing a little bit of ad lib here. But essentially there was a level of investment coming for the state through House Bill 5019 and the acronym, which is OPSS, which was Intention Sustaining Shelter. So essentially Oregon's plan to sustain shelter. And that was intended to sustain the shelter that was built and invested in over the COVID era. And so Benton County was administering dollars through that OPSS and House Bill 5019 for our community. The funding that, or the number of beds that was tied to that funding was then also tied to the phase 1 statewide shelter program allocation. The allocation that came through phase 1 statewide shelter program did not match the same level of investment with OPSS and House Bill 5019 combined. However, phase 1 statewide shelter program grant and contract obligated Benton County to more than the beds that were funded by those previous investments without the same allocation. So one, going already back to OPSS and House Bill 5019, House Bill 5019 was not an adequate allocation even to sustain the shelter that we originally applied for through House Bill 5019. We were able to, in collaboration, when I say we, I mean Unity Shelter and our providers, and with some help from the city and county, we're able to find a way to sustain that shelter through that whole fiscal year that House Bill 5019 applied to. However, even in the House Bill 5019 era, we saw a closure of beds. We saw a closure of beds before House Bill 5019. And House Bill 5019, through the work of partnership with Unity Shelter and the CHRO, we were able to use the funding that the state had, which was supposed to add shelters. We were able to advocate that funding would be used to reactivate beds that had closed previously. And that was the men's shelter. I don't know if you recall, we've had several times that has occurred where we've seen our congregate go co-ed to be able to bridge and get through the full fiscal year until new awards happened. So that $500K estimate is a really moving target as far as what that gap is, because it's based on the existing alternative funding resources available. What we can say is this is this much less than what we got from OHCS in previous years, but what we can't say is how much of a gap does this actually present to being able to maintain that shelter, because we've already are relying on funding outside of OHCS to sustain those shelter. So I've been tasked to work with our shelter provider to see what that gap actually looks like today and in the future, to make sure that we're able to sustain some level of shelter to meet the need of our community. So I will say that $500K, the little squiggly, really lean on that squiggly in front of the $500K right now, because that it is an estimate. And it's based on many different factors given the context of the question.
Thank you for that. So to clarify, if I heard correctly, so it sounds like it's a series of being obligated to provide more beds than getting that amount of funding for, and then trying to figure out additional sources and just kind of this cascade effect downstream.
Exactly. If we obligate ourselves to less beds, the funding gap decreases.
Thank you. That is
Thank you.
Helpful. Do you want to go back to the slides? Thank you.
Yes, please. I realize I thought maybe Counselor Moorfield wanted to lean into this slide, just that we know that you both are here to support staff in presenting this information, and I thought maybe this would be an opportunity. What do staff need from HOPE board members? At this time, there are things that are outside the capacity and ability of staff that we are going to be relying heavily on, and that is to engage in advocacy at a local and state level for increased funding for emergency shelter, really telling the story of the work that we have done in our community, and that we really want to intentionally use this funding to have the outcomes that we as a community want for ourselves, not just what the state has obligated us to. How does the reduced shelter actually impact our community? and then advocating for utilizing additional state funding wherever that might be to keep our shelters open. And then the continued leadership in areas that you all have in the spaces that you came from today, to be able to speak on this issue, as this issue touches everyone. Whether you're a housing provider, a shelter provider, or a social services or health provider, a lack of safe places for people to stay will impact the ability for us to deliver the services that we all give to our community. I do see a hand, so I want to pause.
Go for it, Jim.
Jim, do you want me to leave this slide up while you speak or stop sharing?
Yeah, sure. Leave that up. You were right that I wanted to lean into this slide. I just had that question I wanted to ask first, because, the first bullet about engaging in advocacy, first, besides our commitment, or making our commitment to not lose shelter beds, to not have shelters close or reduce services. If anything, we have to be heading in the other direction, as Sean talked about. But I needed to ask about the source of the reduction, because my assumption was, well, maybe that suggested who we need to advocate with. And it sounds like a fairly complex situation in terms of how funding has rolled out in recent years, and that, if I interpreted some of what you were saying correctly, some of those sources were always intended to be temporary. That's part of what I got out of that. So the question is maybe not so much, but where the reductions are coming from, as much as it is where the opportunities are for advocacy. And I think one of the questions I always ask is who are the effective advocates these days? I'm thinking about, especially with the state, because the obvious place for us to, one obvious place for us to go, not the only one, is with the legislature and Oregon Housing and Community Services. They've set up this regional system of shelter coordination, and now the shelters need to be funded. But I've lost track in my retired years who the effective advocacy groups are that are actually putting together packages of requests. And so one of my questions is, who's putting together packages of requests, and how can we support their efforts?
And I think we don't necessarily have a question today for that, but what we are hopeful to do is, as staff and as leadership within Benton County and other agencies, that we would be able to give feedback to HOPE board members where that advocacy would be most effective. And so that's a commitment on our part to understand what spaces we are in as far as on the staff level with the state, and advocating for very specific operational policies as it relates to funding, but also making sure that we are giving more targeted guidance to HOPE board members where it is appropriate.
Just one other comment before others speak up. I think another piece of the answer to that question is what networks the service providers are involved in, and what they have to say about the opportunities for advocacy.
Thanks,
That wasn't a
Councilman.
question I was expecting an answer to right now, but with future conversations.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to share with the group that there are efforts underway for several counties across Oregon, as well as the Oregon Association of Counties, and some advocacy groups that are contracted, an advocacy group that is contracted with as a lobbyist, to have conversations around crafting asks. And with those will come some opportunities to participate. I don't think that's the only space, however, but it's one that is rapidly coming together, and I'd be glad to report back to this group on those efforts. A kickoff conversation is next week with again several counties and a couple other partners. So I'll keep you all informed.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Can I clarify what I heard, just so I understand our sort of marching orders at the staff level? Really wanting to know who's putting together any packages, requesting support on this topic, so that you have some specifics about where you can direct your advocacy efforts and dial in. And then also asking the CHRO staff to touch base with service providers like Sean and others. Are there any networks that service providers are involved in where they are advocating that they would also recommend and would like your support? Did I hear that asked correctly?
You did, and I would just expand a little bit on the various networks represented in the room right now, in the virtual room. CCOs have their network, and what's happening or not happening with Medicaid reimbursements as it relates to these topics. The nonprofits have their networks. I don't know what it's called now, but the Oregon Housing Alliance, Brigida might have a sense of what they're called now and how active they are. And then, of course, the League of Oregon Cities, which I can get more information about. But there may be community action agencies. So I would want to hear from every one of those networks about how they're addressing this issue.
Thank you for that, Jim. Can I ask any of our other HOPE board members if you have thoughts on this or questions about this that could help guide what we bring back to you?
I think just a reminder, next year is a long session for the legislature. So they're working now in the fall to figure out all the bills and what's going to move for 2027. It's probably too late to get stuff into 2020. We need to get into 2027, of course, but also we need to address some of the gaps that will be happening earlier before the biennium ends too. So it's twofold, emergency sort of situations and needs, and then also longer term sustainability and reaching out to all the entities that Jim just referenced is important, along with some others that we probably haven't thought about yet.
Just wanted to hold space in case Jennifer or Bruce wanted to chime in.
I think it's really a follow-up to Brigida's comment. I think it's really important for us to understand when it comes to anything coming out of the legislature, those packages are being put together now, not in February. The asks that are going to be lined up are being lined up as we speak. So if it comes, the opening of the legislative session is actually too late. I mean, advocacy is not too late, but getting the ask packages together is too late by that time, because that agenda will be set this fall for the legislature and what is being requested. So I'm certainly will be curious as well about what OHCS wants to put together, what they're going to be asking for. But mostly I would need to know what we need to get behind and whether asks are being put together that will address this issue. In the long term, at least, Brigida's correct that we have a short-term issue as well.
Chelsea, I saw you come off mute, and I'm sorry if I talked over you. Did you want to chime in or ask a question?
No, I just accidentally came off mute. Thanks for asking.
Well, I understand what the ask is for staff, and April, it sounds like you have some insights about what's going on with lobbying with the county too. So we can huddle up at the staff level and come up with some opportunities and send them via email before your next meeting, which isn't until October, so that you can have some ideas or opportunities for where you would like to plug in your various networks. Rebecca, did you want to add anything more before we move on? Okay. We can continue on with our CHRO progress update. Rebecca, do you want to take over?
Yeah, I actually interestingly came out of a meeting that represents a milestone in the development of this. So one of the things we brought to you in previous updates is a process of improving referral pathways and accurate data collection. This aligns with our strategic plan for the Coordinated Homeless Response Office and some of our foundational policies and planning process through the H.O.P.E Advisory Board and the H.O.P.E policies and our 10-year update to solve homelessness. So this is a really critical development and what our community has been looking towards for a while. So I actually was in a meeting today that worked on that. So I'm excited to give an update. And then also the street outreach and encampment response coordination. This aligns with a rapid response component, which is part of our strategic plan, is that we really need to be able to meet people where they're at and be able to deliver services very quickly. And then an update on the regional assessment and plan for the statewide shelter program. So the improved referral pathways and accurate data collection, after a lot of work with our community and positioning ourselves as supporting for leadership and overall coordination, along with providing direct services through the flexible housing subsidy pool, it allowed us to be in a position where we could see where we could leverage our role as the county in a way to support streamlining services for households. And one thing that we identified as a potential opportunity was the idea of a universal referral process and form that would allow households that are seeking services in Benton County for housing and support services, essentially a virtual single door or virtual navigation center that they can get access to the wide variety of services that happen in each of our different community-based organizations and some of our state and our county and city agencies as well. And so we are in the very early stages of rolling that out. Specifically today, we actually hosted the first case conferencing of 10 households where we piloted the form with to select a subset of those 10 households for the next enrollment into the FHSP. That is a big deal. We've been holding off new enrollment of households until we had some things in place and made sure that funding was at least stable for the foreseeable future, which means June 30th, 2027 is the foreseeable future, to be able to support those households and placement into housing. While that is the focus right now of the universal referral process, we look forward to opportunities to use the same process to connect households to other services in our community. Julie is also spearheading making sure that we are engaging all the agencies that would benefit from training for the universal referral process, but also that there is a new coordinated entry assessment that goes along, and we've integrated that in to make sure that we're aligning with best practices and making sure that we have fair and equitable selection of households for services in our community. So we'll be rolling out training in the fall for both agencies who are actively engaged in the homeless management information system, which is the data system we use to capture this data, but also agencies who do not use that system, but also serve the same populations. That includes like parole and probation, adult treatment court, deflection, and some of our behavioral health providers as well. Another exciting update is regarding our street outreach and encampment response initiative. So we have, through the Housing 360 grant, we were prioritizing for our community households that experience high complex needs. And this was something that came out of our implementation of the executive order rapid rehousing efforts, where we were tasked with identifying priority populations. And through anecdotal and qualitative and quantitative data from our community, we recognized that for folks to navigate out of unsheltered homelessness, we really needed to find a way to address folks with those high complex needs that either have not been engaging services or have had gaps to being able to engage those services. And so that Housing 360 is used for the street outreach and encampment response, because this is an area where we believe we can invest more energy and resources into to be able to really focus on unsheltered homelessness in Benton County. And so we've been able to execute a contract with Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center. That contract has a framework of partnership with county and city partners to establish a structure for street outreach, but also a structure of street outreach that aligns with encampment response that the city partners also are partnering with as well. And that includes a neighborhood focus area where we can look at specific areas of focus and assess our performance in those areas and determine outcomes for actual people. And so that's very exciting. We had our most recent meeting about that included representatives from the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center. We had our housing providers there, along with Parks and Recreation, along with behavioral health, to understand how we can create a rapid response system that can meet people where they're at that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, to try to create a higher level of stability and safety for people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Benton County. Another initiative for that is working closely with the city for the 2 properties that they have secured to see how those housing resources can be leveraged in supporting pathways out of the street outreach and encampment response into actual housing. We also are excited that we've recruited and have successfully brought on a risk reduction navigator that will play a key role in the implementation of our street outreach and encampment response. So that's an exciting component, and that is actually a listed milestone in our plan for the state for our Housing 360. So we talked about the regional plan and assessment earlier. Ultimately, the goal of the statewide shelter program is to create a standardized approach to serving folks that access shelter throughout the state of Oregon, while also accounting for the unique flexibility and needs of each community. We are proud to have submitted our plan to the state, and also in that plan provide significant feedback on how local government can play a key role in helping the state understand how best to roll out a standardized statewide shelter program. So we do have that available if we want to make sure that that is accessible to all folks. But as we said in the beginning, it was challenging to truly set ourselves up for aspirational goals in that plan based on the funding situation we're under. But at the same time, we were able to highlight the magnitude of work that our community has made over many years, and really demonstrate the foundational work that we have done with the investments that we got from the state and how we intend to move forward with those that foundational work. So we were really proud to be in a position to give that type of information to the state on behalf of our whole community. So, all right. I'll hand this one over to you, Julie. I think I'm getting tired of hearing my voice and my throat's getting tired.
That's okay. And this really falls more under sort of the roundtable updates beyond the scope of what we had promised to come back and share updates about last time. Our CHRO, the Coordinated Homeless Response Office, we continue to engage property managers. In fact, we've just had new property managers that we're doing outreach to. Our wonderful program coordinator, Penny, is going to be getting in touch with them, saying, here's what our flexible housing subsidy pool is all about. Here's how we support folks. Here's how we pay the rent. Here is why and how you can be part of the solution to homelessness as a private property manager. And thanks for the ongoing coordination, Brigitte and Paul, with upcoming properties that you're working on. We also have been working a lot this year to have the Benton County and the City of Corvallis as part of the coordinated homeless response to align our scope of services with different funding opportunities and also have them align with the expectations of the statewide sheltering program, that SSP that we talked about, which is what is funding some of our emergency shelter. We really want to try to have consistent and integrated standards across different contracts from the city and the county and different funding streams so that providers are not having to try to meet one set of criteria for one funder and a different set of criteria for another funder. So doing what we can to collaborate and coordinate our language for consistency that helps us and also helps everybody providing services out there. Okay. And then we know that it's hard to hear that there's not enough money for shelter and that there's more need than we have capacity. So what can we do in the midst of this scarcity, and how can we fill gaps by doing what we can at the local level? Really wanting to try to strengthen our provider capacity and help support them with our FHSP and enrolling new households for the first time in almost a couple of years. Having training and support for our community partners as we roll out the universal referral process and a new coordinated entry tool. Partnering with United Way. United Way has done a great job to take on a brand new website that helps recruit volunteers for all of our local community partners. And so working with them to say, how do we best coordinate across volunteerism in this county? And then partnering with affordable housing developers. Thanks again to Brigida for being the connection to so many of the affordable developers in this area so that we can meet them, so that we can work with them, we can teach them about our flexible housing subsidy pool and create MOUs with them so that we have set aside units. And we know that we can get folks into those affordable units. And I think we just finished one today. Congrats, Rebecca. Great work. And we continue to pursue HRSN reimbursement to try to leverage Medicaid funding, but we still do not have a contract with IHN. And so we could use support on that one from Bruce or any of the other leaders. OHCS continues to tell us to leverage Medicaid funding, and yet we at the local level are having a tough time leveraging that funding stream. Do you want to go over our commitment to the HOPE Board, Rebecca, or do you want me to keep going?
You can go ahead. I'll
Okay.
add a little bit on the tail end.
Thank you. In the next couple of weeks, we will be putting together a CHRO news and updates, like mini newsletter or email, and we plan to send it out by the end of July. It'll include everything from this meeting, as well as staff level updates for folks to be aware of what we're doing and track progress in our community or hear about the needs. Your next meeting is in October. And the Coordinated Homeless Response Office, we plan to return with updates about our statewide sheltering plan and any funding updates that we learn. Although, as we discussed previously, we'd like to follow up via email with some ways that you can advocate. We plan to have progress on those work group topics that Rebecca presented about to ask for further guidance from you this fall. And then we hope to hear any updates from HOPE Board members about any of your own advocacy efforts in your own networks or ways that you are advocating. Rebecca.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight we really take our commitments here at the CHRO seriously, and you are looking at 50% of the CHRO team here today. And what we will be embarking over the next couple months is a lot of work, and we're very excited about it. We are very much compelled by the work that we're doing here. And the statewide shelter program will come with additional work. There will be lots of reporting requirements that we as a regional coordinator will need to begin to understand in the next couple months. We also will need to be executing contracts with the recipients, sub-grantees of that funding. That will take a lot of time as well. So while we want to stick true to the commitments we list here today, we also want grace as we embark in this next chapter in Phase 2 statewide shelter program, also while attempting to find creative ways to leverage the funding that we are getting from the state and that is within the locus of control of staff to address those gaps. We've been able to advocate very strongly on a staff level to OHCS staff to make sure that we are getting as much flexibility as possible between our rapid rehousing funding and our shelter funding to make sure that we're not having people return. Well, we can't make sure, but to reduce the risk of people returning to unsheltered homelessness who have been able to benefit from the shelter investments previously. The universal referral process is one component of us being able to help with those pathways. And so while we commit ourselves to this work, we look forward to having a reciprocity of commitment to looking at ways we can collaboratively look at some of these processes that require components of all agencies around the table today.
And Councillor Andrade, we have 5 minutes left for any roundtable updates from anybody else on the HOPE board. So if Jennifer, Jim, yeah, Bruce, go ahead, Jim. Oh, Jim, you're muted if you can unmute yourself.
The discussion we had earlier in the meeting about opportunities for advocacy, you know, the answers to that question and then whatever we might do about it. October is too far away. So I throw that out there. I mean, it's reasonable that we have quarterly meetings to talk about the breadth of topics that the HOPE board is responsible for. I'm wondering if we can do something in the interim, though, to focus solely on funding gaps and advocacy. As I was saying before, you know, things like legislative agendas, you know, are getting formulated now, and the various advocacy networks around the state will be, you know, October will be right in the middle of that process. So we need to be thinking about this sooner. So I would put it out there that it would be appropriate for this group to have a meeting in the interim, you know, whenever we could get more information about what advocacy might look like. And we didn't talk about the short-term gap of $500,000 and what we can do about that. October's far away for that discussion as well.
Thanks, Councillor Moorfield. I do think that, you know, after an initial discussion amongst these city and county partners, I would love to, you know, formulate and share what the plan is there with you all, and based on that effort and others that may be existing, there may be a space for another virtual connection. I'm not sure if scheduling that now or committing it to it now based on the timing is what we should do, but I absolutely will keep the group informed on those next steps, and we'll absolutely need all of our support moving forward. I think that, you know, there are some additional spaces to talk through our short-term funding needs. I'm having conversations with county leadership about, you know, agenda items, getting some of our local governments together to have conversations around sharing knowledge about the funding gap and coming to solutions and commitments. Those things will be shared with you all as well. So I think that, you know, there are some pieces in the works, and in the next couple of weeks we can get some information out to the HOPE board.
Any more updates from anyone? Is this the time to adjourn the meeting then, or do you have any last minute things to say?
No, I think this is where we would adjourn, and thank you for running the meeting, Councillor Andrade. We really appreciate your leadership.
Thank you. Okay, we'll adjourn. It's 5 o'clock. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and looking forward to hearing from you soon. Take care.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and stop the recording. Paula, did you get everything that you needed?
Yes,